Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, May the 24th, 2024. Today I'm going to talk about Britain and the fact that Rishi Sunak, the British Prime Minister, has announced that there's going to be a general election on July the 4th. Now, I suppose you could say that one of the jobs of an astrologer is to predict the result of elections. Now, this is a bit of a difficult one because there's no point in being contrarian for the sake of it. If you look at the betting sites, the odds of the Labour Party getting an absolute majority as a result of the July the 4th election are 1 in 7. In other words, it's not quite a certainty, but in terms of betting statistics, that is pretty good. I mean, effectively, we have to say that Labour is going to win on July the 4th. At least that's what the pundits are saying, that's what the experts are saying, that's what the polling companies are saying. And so, it is very unlikely that anything is going to change between now and July. So I just don't think there's much point in trying to be a contrarian. Yeah, it would be great to be a contrarian, and that's the only thing I could do without seeming stupid. If I said, oh yeah, the Conservatives are going to win, now that would be a very surprising thing to say, and of course I might get a lot of credit if the Tories were to win in July. But reality is the Tories are not going to win. At least that's what the odds are saying. I mean, okay, sometimes one can be a contrarian. I think in 2016 I predicted that the Brexit in the referendum that the Brexit side would win, and that was the odds were really against Brexit. But in this case, I don't think I'm going to stick my neck out. I just don't see the point. And the only way to gain credit is to be contrarian. Because if I were to say, I've looked at the crystal ball and I've told you, and I'm looking at it very hard, and I can see that Labour's going to win, I'd kind of seem stupid because you can read that in the newspapers. Why would you need astrology to say that? And I would be open to the accusation that I'm not really making a prediction. I'm just as I said, following what the newspapers say. There it goes. There's the kettle. Okay, so that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about Britain. I'm going to talk about Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister. I'm going to talk about Keir Starmer, who is leader of the opposition. I'm going to have a brief mention of Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage has just said he's not going to stand for Parliament because he's going to be putting his energy into helping Donald win. That's Nigel Farage's priority, but still I'll have a quick look at his horoscope. But before I do that, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Friday, May the 24th, 2024. And here we have the horoscope for today, set for New York as usual at noon. And we can see that the moon is in Sagittarius. It's right in the middle of Sagittarius. And so it doesn't matter what your time zone is, moon is going to be in Sagittarius all day long. And I suppose that Sagittarius is a fire sign. You can see that Moon in Sagittarius is making a trine aspect to Mars. So there's lots of energy flying around. We've got a fiery trine. So it's going to be relatively easy to get things done, make things happen. I suppose people may be fairly quick to show their anger and their annoyance, but it's a trine between Moon and Mars. There's a certain ease there. And so if we want to assert ourselves, I think we can without there having to be a huge amount of drama. At least I would say that if it wasn't for the fact that the moon is square Saturn. So we've got moon square Saturn, then it trines Mars. And you can see the same degree is coming up. So when the moon gets to 18 degrees Sagittarius, which would be, I don't know, early afternoon in the US, which would be sort of early afternoon in New York, that would be early evening in Europe. Then you'll have the moon at 18 Sagittarius, you'll have Saturn at 18 Pisces, Mars at 18 Aries. And so we may get a feeling that we are trying to assert ourselves. At first, there is a bit of a block, and then things do start to move. That's one approach. Another approach would be to say, well, focus on what's easy. Maybe there are two alternatives today. We can focus on the stress of moon square Saturn. Things are difficult. There are blocks, we may have to deal with the block of our emotions, other people's emotions. Saturn is in Pisces, remember? With that Saturn in Pisces, just remember the tarot card from the Aleister Crowley Thoth deck, which is 8 of Cups. And in that tarot deck, you just see there's a lot of black in there, and you see mud. And it's just, things get ground to a standstill by the mud. Yeah, there's emotion there, but it's not the kind of emotion that's very helpful. And so that would be the moon making a square to Saturn. That is one option. So perhaps we have to focus on the areas where we can be effective, where emotions are not involved, and maybe we can just move straight to moon trine Mars, just getting things done very easily. And the moon in Sagittarius does not just trine Mars, it also makes a trine to Chiron. And with moon trine Chiron, in fact, let's be honest, it makes a trine to this whole configuration here. You've got moon, Mars, Chiron, sort of all together in a conjunction. So the moon hits that by trine, and it may be that we can put some of our energy into helping someone. Maybe someone has got some psychological wound, or there's something bothering them, they're feeling upset about something, and we can intervene. So that is a possibility, that moon trine the North Node Mars Chiron conjunction allows us to make the world a better place, or make some corner of the world a better place, or make someone happier, or maybe heal someone's wound. But I mean that of course in a non-clinical sense, talking about that metaphorical psychological wound that perhaps we can help with. So we need to consider that as a possibility. I suppose I should have said a day or two ago that Mars is on the Chiron North Node midpoint. And I think it's a little bit past exact Mars on the Chiron North Node midpoint, but I would have said that we're still feeling it. And so with Mars on the Chiron North Node midpoint, I think this is a time when some of us might feel that we do need to put energy into healing something, or creating, or making something whole. We just see that something is wrong, and we might feel that our decisive action can perhaps make a difference. And I mean that. I hate that phrase, making a difference. The local police here. They always have "making a difference," I think, written on their vehicles. I don't know, but I just don't like that phrase, and so I do try to avoid it. But I think there may be times at the moment where our decisiveness can help heal something. Perhaps it's about an injustice. But so keep your eyes open, and when you see that something needs to be done and you're not risking your safety, then perhaps we are all going to be obliged to do something about it. Now, there is another aspect that we need to consider, and that is the semi-sextile between Mars and Saturn. Semisextile, that is when you've got two planets that are one sign apart. So the semisextile, if I look at semisextiles in this book, so this is Raphael's Ephemeris, and Raphael's Ephemeris has been published for ages, I don't know, a couple of 100 years. And in Raphael's Ephemeris, it sort of categorizes, it goes through lots and lots of different aspects, and it has these B's and G's, and I think the B's and G's stand for good and bad. So if I look at this, and it treats a semisextile as being a G, which, I've always noticed that, since I first started buying this thing in the mid-80s. But this G is kind of a bit concerning. I mean, I'm not quite sure why this Mars sextile, Mars semi-sextile Saturn. Well, actually, it used to have a G. The G has actually gone, but that's strange. Sometimes there's a little G next to the semi-sextile. There is not a little G next to this one. Maybe they've changed their approach, but a semi-sextile kind of sounds good, doesn't it? And because it's a sextile. A sextile is a good aspect. And semisextile, sounds like, but it's not. Mars Saturn semisextile is not a good aspect. Because firstly, you've got two planets that are two signs apart. And so when you've got planets that are two signs apart, they tend to be very different from one another. So Aries, Pisces, they don't have anything in common. That's the first point. So if you've got two planets in signs that are right next to each other, they're likely to work in very different ways. So a semisextile does represent tension. Not the same kind of tension as a square or as an opposition, or even a semi-square or sesquiquadrate, but still there's tension. They don't really work very well together. And when you put Mars and Saturn together, then you've got the possibility of real frustration. And we can get very annoyed about things. And we just might not feel that we can get things done. I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, when you think about it, Mars in Aries is about action. We want to get things done. Mars in its own sign. But it has to cope with the fact that Saturn is in Pisces. Saturn in Pisces, all of that sort of blocked emotion, hesitancy, fear, reluctance to do anything. So if we are trying to get things done, we might have to be dealing with our own concerns. Something is holding us back. Have we got what it takes? There's perhaps a lot of fear there. Or it just might be other people, just their fears. No, you can't do that. You don't want to take that kind of risk. Now, should we regard Saturn as the offending party? Well, not necessarily. Look at it from Saturn's perspective. You've got Saturn in Pisces trying to be cautious, got these strong feelings and things that are difficult, we're in a dangerous world. Then Mars comes along. Come on, let's go for it. Let's go for it. Go for it. It doesn't matter. Let's just do it. Saturn says, no, this is not the right thing to do. And so somehow Mars and Saturn have to talk to each other, and they need to understand each other. If we are going to take the initiative, we perhaps have to be aware of the consequences, the emotional consequences, and we may not be able to move as fast as we'd like. Likewise, if Saturn is stuck in the mud, it perhaps needs to recognize that in order to get out of the mud, something has got to happen, some dramatic initiative. It might be easier to stay stuck in the mud, but if you stay stuck in the mud, you're going to sink. You got to get out of the mud. I mean, it's like there are often these YouTube videos about how someone rescues horses. You find some horse or some larger animal even stuck in some muddy pit, and clearly the horse is going to drown if someone doesn't do something about it. And so you see all these people with ropes and whatever pulling the horse out. And maybe that's how Mars semisextile Saturn should be seen from Saturn's perspective. The animal has to be dragged out of the mud, and that's Mars in Aries, you could argue. And that's the broad picture for today, at least from a geocentric perspective. And from a heliocentric perspective, let's just see if anything has changed, anything is happening. I don't promise that anything has happened. So here is the heliocentric solar system. Remember the sun where it should be, and I don't see anything particularly dramatic. We can see that there is still from a heliocentric perspective. We had a Venus-Jupiter conjunction yesterday. From a geocentric perspective, we also have a heliocentric Venus-Jupiter conjunction. So that's more of the same. But this heliocentric conjunction is actually applying. So if you think you have missed the Venus-Jupiter conjunction geocentrically, well, don't worry, because right now Venus is still applying to a conjunction of Jupiter from a heliocentric view. And probably that is the main thing going on. Don't think there's a great deal else. Okay, Earth square Mercury. The Earth is so Mercury. You can see Mercury is in Pisces. Remember, heliocentrically, and Mercury is applying to a square of the Earth, and I think we might feel that today. So with Mercury square Earth, I think a lot of us might feel that we're somewhat on edge. Mercury can always put us on edge, and I don't know whether we should really look at Mercury's sign in a heliocentric chart, but a lot of people are nervous, and they might say things without really thinking about it, and maybe make fools of themselves, or even ourselves, if it's us saying things. So perhaps we have to be a little bit careful what we say, but I don't think that Earth semi-square Mercury is particularly dramatic, and I don't think that the heliocentric position is particularly dramatic. Okay, so now is time to look at the astrology from a 12-sign view, and the normal chart. Okay, so these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, May the 24th, 2024. Aries. it's a day, Aries, when I think that you really should try to be useful. There are things you can do, and you should not be entirely focused on yourself. And so I think that means that you do have to make a special effort to be sensitive. Now, that sensitivity may not be immediate. You may have to really try hard, because it's not a particularly sensitive planetary environment at the moment. We don't have a lot of stuff in water signs. Okay, Saturn's in Pisces, Neptune's in Pisces, but these are slow-moving planets, and so in a first instance, you might just not notice things. But try again. How do you notice things? Aries has intuition. You can see the signs, and then suddenly things will make sense, and you'll suddenly realize that perhaps something is wrong. And once you realize that something is wrong, then you are in a position to take action. And really, this is something that's been going on for a couple of days. I just haven't really pointed it out, but I'm pointing it out now. And so, yeah, open your eyes. I think there's someone out there, or something out there, that needs your help. And your dynamic initiative really could be very useful, and you do have an opportunity to make someone's day if you have a chance. So really try to think about that. Though at the same time, it's very important that you have a broad vision about what can be done. And okay, it's not just about helping people, it's about being yourself. And as an Aries, it's just terribly important that you are yourself, and that you have the freedom to act, where you like and when you like. And you may want to move into areas that you haven't touched before. You maybe want to sort of expand the horizon of your operations. Now, there may be a few issues on the way. Firstly, the moon is making a square to Saturn. So moon square Saturn may be about your fears holding you back. Some concern just kicks in. And we get the same picture with the fact that Mars is semi-square Saturn. So remember, Mars is your ruling planet. So if Mars is semisextile Saturn, so did I say semi-square Saturn? I meant semisextile. Mars is semisextile Saturn. Something's holding you back. Now the question is, what is holding you back? I think that in many cases it might be your own concerns. I mean, I know Aries is not supposed to have concerns. I mean, Aries is supposed to be a simple sign. By simple, I mean straightforward. I don't mean it in a derogatory sense. But you are aware of things that could go wrong, and you may be overfeeling things internally. And yeah, that might hold you back. Now, that doesn't mean to say that these fears are not reasonable. They certainly have to be taken seriously. And you have to work around them and work with them. In fact, fears can be useful because they can inform you about, dangers, and it means you don't do anything too stupid. But once you get around these fears, I think that you really are in a position to make your influence felt. Though, when dealing with other people, particularly those close to you, bear in mind that Venus has just changed sign. It's moved from Taurus into Gemini, and Venus's position is sort of a bit mixed. Yes, Venus is in mutual reception to Mercury because Venus is in Mercury's sign and Mercury's in Venus' sign. So in one sense, Venus is quite strong. So you're talking about someone perhaps close to you who, in one sense, has a lot to offer and can, really help you and can, come up with interesting ideas. But Venus is moving towards a conjunction with the Sun, and so with Venus moving towards a conjunction of the Sun, it's maybe that there's someone close to you who is under the weather or is overwhelmed and just can't fully express themselves. And perhaps this is something you need to get to grips with. Maybe you can sort of understand that there is an issue and perhaps do something to reassure them or work out what is bothering them. And perhaps you can take steps to make the situation right. Again, it's another situation where you have to have your eyes open and be aware of all things and people around you. And if anyone's under the weather, you should be able to pick up on it and as soon as possible. And that's it for today. Taurus. Now, I did an introduction today, just now, when I was looking at the overall planetary picture. But I must confess that I missed something out, which I believe is of relevance to you. And what I did miss out was an assessment of Venus, because Venus is your ruler. And Venus is changing signs, or has changed signs, from Taurus into Gemini. Now, as I was telling Aries, when Venus moves into Gemini, it is in mutual reception to Mercury. Now, that is good, because Venus is in Gemini's in Mercury's sign, because Mercury rules Gemini, and Mercury likewise is in Venus's sign because Mercury's in Taurus. So Venus in mutual reception to Mercury is about versatility. It's about being able to communicate, lots of things to say. After all, Venus is your ruler, and it is in Gemini. But Venus, as it moves into Gemini, starts making a conjunction to the Sun. And conjunctions to the Sun are not necessarily fortunate. Venus, in the jargon, is combust, and it's potentially being burnt up. I don't mean that literally, but something is in your way. Something is blocking you, and I think is just preventing you from communicating as you would like to communicate. The words are a bit frozen or burnt, or whatever. Because how can something be frozen if it's combust the sun? But the words are not just coming out because you just can't see, and that might also have an impact on your reasoning ability. You can't quite think straight because you're getting too close to something. So what is that about? I think it may be about certain individuals who perhaps know you very well, who are being over assertive or making too many demands. And it's possible that it's about your family. That is something to think about. You might love your family very much, but sometimes they can be a major distraction, or things going on in your home. It's just not helping. And so things that you thought you'd moved on from, but which are nonetheless quite fundamental to who you are, could be distracting you and could just be preventing you from making the most of your potential. Also, there may be certain financial concerns that are distracting you. I'm not convinced that these financial concerns are in themselves massively important, at least in the short term, but they do seem to be taking up some of your time and energy and holding you back. And I think perhaps this also links up with the full moon, because we had a full moon yesterday, and that full moon was across the finance axis of your chart. So that's another reason why money might be an issue, and might be preventing you from thinking clearly about what should be done. In fact, it's often the case that thinking too much about money can actually prevent one from making money, or can prevent one from actually getting a grip on one's finances. Because it's easy to start worrying about money and to start to be irrational about money. So, I have been a bit negative there about the state of Venus, but Venus is in mutual reception. And one way of looking at mutual receptions is to consider it in terms of changing position. And so if you are in a position that is difficult, you don't like it, you're not comfortable there, maybe you're just finding yourself being hemmed in by other people, or by a situation you don't like, then you have the chance to just leave. I suppose, from a Star Trek perspective, you can just, what's the phrase? You can beam out, can't you? You can just go into your own personal transporter room and just disappear, and materialize somewhere else. Okay, not literally, but of course, be careful with Taurus. Tauruses can actually take things quite literally sometimes, but there is this chance to just switch from one place to another place. And maybe if you found yourself very recently in a new situation that you're not entirely comfortable with, then I think you're going to have a chance to go back. It's no disgrace going back, because you know that you were more comfortable somewhere else. And so temporarily, to avoid something that you're not comfortable with, you can just retreat. No disgrace. And in doing that, you're going to feel a whole lot better. And, you're still trying to take on board the full moon. I think that's absolutely fine. And I think that might be the right approach. Gemini. Well, yesterday there was a full moon, and that full moon was across the main axis of your chart, and I think that the full moon yesterday was very much about other people and how you relate to other people, whether or not certain people are good for you or whether they're bad for you. And you can perhaps see things for how they are, for how they really are. And you can make some choices. But you can't just let things happen, just let people just do their own thing without reacting to the situation. You have to make your position clear. I think that is important. Otherwise, yesterday's full moon could just walk all over you, and you might find that your independence is infringed. And it's not just that we've got a full moon, it's the fact that Venus is moving into Gemini. Indeed, Venus has moved into Gemini. And Venus is the planet of relationships. And so with Venus moving into Gemini, you are, I think, more communicative than usual, especially as Venus is in mutual reception to Mercury. Mercury is your ruler, and Mercury is in Taurus, Venus's sign. Venus is in Gemini, Mercury is sign, so we've got Venus-Mercury mutual reception, and I think you're going to find it really easy to talk. You should do, and there are lots of things to talk about, and it does seem that there is one person who is very interested in you. I don't know for what reason, but they seem to be interested in you. And perhaps you should take note of this person. What do they want? Find out what they want. Maybe this person could be a benefit. I think you probably are a benefit because Venus is in mutual reception to Mercury, and I think that your social skills are going to be very powerful today. And I think you really are helped by that Venus moving into your sign. So in that sense, things do look good. Though I suppose in certain situations you can be a little bit harsh, and that is because the moon is making a square to Saturn, and I would see the moon as being about people in general, and moving to a square of Saturn closes the moon down with that moon square Saturn, and that Saturn may represent your priorities. It may just symbolize what you think is important today. And Geminis do have priorities, and Geminis can often take the view, well, this is what matters today, and this other thing is not relevant. I don't need to worry about it. I don't know. Do you feel that? I mean, I'm a Gemini. I seem to remember as a child having toys and just having two toys, and just totally prioritizing one toy over another toy, and in a very negative and destructive way. I was sort of attacking another toy. I was very small. I don't know how old I was, 5. But and Geminis perhaps through life can take priorities, can have their priorities, and those priorities can be not just harsh but unnecessary. So there's a danger that you just decide that one thing is important to the exclusion of something else, and if that something else represents someone else, then that could be a problem. So do consider how you come over. And that is particularly the case if you are engaged in something that you think is really important. This is important. It's about work. It's about something that really matters to me. It's about my business. It's about who I am. And I don't have to worry about you because right now you're not strictly speaking relevant. So you've got to get around that. I would suggest that you're aware of that moon square Saturn, and you're aware of how that moon square Saturn may encourage you to be harsh, but it's unnecessary. You can always give someone a few minutes of your time. You're not that busy. Cancer. The moon is well and truly in Sagittarius, and it's going to be in Sagittarius all day long. And from a Cancerian view, Sagittarius is a sign that doesn't really fit. From a Cancerian view, Sagittarius doesn't fit. I mean, Cancer is a water sign. It's a cardinal sign. Sagittarius is a fire sign. It's a mutable sign. And you just don't quite feel in the first instance that things are quite right. And you may feel that you need to just back off a bit and just regarding things as being annoying, difficult, and as far as you're concerned, the best you can do is just make sure that everything is in order and that the surrounding chaos doesn't completely engulf you. And so that may be how you're imagining everything. But don't take it too seriously. The moon is in Sagittarius, that's the way it is, but that doesn't mean to say it's a negative. You have a clear insight into the way things should be. And if something is wrong and something is wrongly positioned, you're going to know about it straight away. And that means that you're going to be in a position to make a few changes. And it might feel tedious, but you can do it. And that moon in Sagittarius is trine Mars in Aries. And I think that moon trine Mars actually, Cancer, allows you to get a lot done today in a very insightful way. I think you'll know what needs to be done, and also in a way that is very useful and that can actually allow you to focus on your ambitions. Whatever you want done, whatever's important to you today. Think about what you want to achieve in whatever area of life we're talking about. Whatever area of life is important to you, what you want to achieve, and by making sure that everything is in the right place, you can achieve a great deal. At the time, you might feel that nothing is going on, that you're not making an impact, that it's slow, and you just might feel that you're like a crab out of water. I mean, I suppose crabs can live out of water, can't they? But keep going, and you will make good progress. And I think people will actually start to rely on you. They'll actually start to realize how completely useful you are. And so, in that sense, I think it can be a pretty good day. Though, I have to remind you that the moon is making a square to Saturn. And that square to Saturn needn't be a problem, but you do have to recognize that it exists. And it is possible that moon square to Saturn has some relevance for one-to-one relationships. It's perhaps about you and someone else having a difference of opinion. Now, what you have a difference of opinion on may be fairly irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, but at the time, you just find that you have a view, someone else has a view. It may be a philosophical or a political conflict, but these views clash with each other, and it could just bring things to a halt. And it's perhaps one person may say that you can't do that because of that, and because of one reason or another, you and someone else might be actually restricting each other's freedom. There are things that you and this other person both want to do, and it seems that you can't both do it at the same time. And that might lead to some difficulty. Now, it may be that it can be quite useful to have a disagreement. This is moon square Saturn. This is not moon opposition Saturn. It's about having a disagreement without necessarily having a serious, irreconcilable argument. And so perhaps you need to work out why the other person is being stubborn, why they're just holding you back. And they might have something very useful to say. They might, and if you can understand another person's perspective, that I think will allow both you and them to be able to move on. Though, remember, it's not just about the moon square Saturn. The moon is also trine Mars, and it just may be that you have to just deal with something small in order to do the things that you really want to do. So it's not a situation where you can act immediately. First, you've got to sort something out. Once you've sorted it out, once you've perhaps had a discussion with someone, explained your position, and come to some kind of agreement, then you'll be in a position to take action and to really make a powerful impact. Leo, you are in, I think, quite a friendly mood. After all, Venus is moving into Gemini. Venus is now actually starting to move towards a conjunction with the Sun. And so, in one sense, that's probably quite good from a Leo perspective, because there are people out there who like you, who want to get close to you. And if you make a special effort to socialize, I think you'll be rewarded. But do understand that it is a two-way process. You mustn't be totally obsessed with yourself. Venus is moving towards a conjunction of the Sun, but Venus is somewhat combust. Combust means close to the Sun. Kind of literally, it means being burnt up. So yes, someone might be moving into your orbit, but as they move into your orbit, you need to show them some respect, and you need to understand, what they're saying, what they're trying to achieve, and you just mustn't crowd them out, because if you crowd them out and with your ego, you might end up by burning them out, and that is certainly not something you want to do. And at the same time, you need to consider, what do you need to do to achieve your ambitions? And, ambition is not about having a single focus. At least at the moment it's not. Yes, it's nice to have a single focus, to be focused on this. I'm going to go for this, I'm not going to care about anything else. But that might have worked when the Sun was in Taurus. Remember, Sun is your ruler, but the Sun is no longer in Taurus, it's in Gemini. And with the Sun in Gemini, if you want to achieve your aims, you do have to be a little bit flexible, and you do have to consider alternative views. And if someone is presenting you with alternative views, then you need to listen to them, and you perhaps need to be quiet. And that might be the problem of Venus getting too close to the Sun, which is happening. Venus might be the messenger, someone who is telling you the way things should be, someone who's offering you advice. And you need to take that advice or listen to that advice. Okay, you don't have to accept the advice, but you do need to listen to it. And that actually might be a theme for today, being aware of the advice that you're being given and being able to act on it. But once you get that advice, and if you respect other people, it really is important to show respect for people. Once you show that respect, I think things do look good for you. And I think, Leo, if you want, you're able to express yourself very well, in quite a sudden and dramatic way. And I think this is especially the case if something is not going right. So if when I say something is not going right, something not going right that doesn't necessarily involve you. You see something is wrong and you intervene. And if your intervention is fast and sudden, you can get people to stop and listen and take you seriously. And you can if necessary, what's the phrase? Read people the riot act. Yes, you can do that. As they say, telling people that it is unacceptable what they're doing, and they have to stop. And you may even have some kind of legal authority in telling people that it is unacceptable and that they need to change their ways fast. And so, if you do get into that situation, perhaps you need to have the confidence to express that power. Yes, I think you really can do it. Virgo. You benefit, I think, from the fact that Venus has gone into Gemini, and because Venus has gone into Gemini, that means that Venus is now in a sign ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is your ruler, and Mercury is in Taurus, which is a sign ruled by Venus, and that means that Venus and Mercury are in mutual reception. And so I think that puts you in a great position, and I think that you're going to be able to communicate very well, and I think that you're going to be more charismatic than usual. You will have a certain ease to you, a certain charm, which I think that you can really put into action. So, Virgo, don't doubt yourself, and don't feel that you have to immediately focus on little details. You can use your charm as a way of getting results, because people are going to like you, and there seems to be no doubt about that, and that puts you in a position where you can make things happen. And actually, I think that many Virgos are actually going to want to make things happen. You're going to feel that as things stand, things could be better. And you may take the view that actually some kind of dramatic initiative may be required. And that may reflect a little bit of inattention. You feel that the world out there could be better, and you feel that perhaps some dramatic intervention can actually move things on. And normally that would be a bit overwhelming for a Virgo, but I think you can handle it. And it may have a lot to do with what you say. Your words have an impact. And by making it very clear what you would like to happen, I really do think that people are going to listen to you and accept that your view of the world is the right view of the world, and maybe that your plans, even though they might be dramatic, are actually possible. So it's just very important not to doubt yourself. And yes, there may be moments when you doubt yourself. I think that there could be a couple of people who do resist what you're saying. It's not, you can't be friends with everyone. You can't impress everyone. You can impress 90% of the world, or 90% of the people who come into contact, but there's always that 10%, and you mustn't take that 10% to heart. It may be that the first person you meet today is not very constructive, and you might take the view that that person who is not being constructive is representative of the whole world, which would be untrue. So don't reach conclusions too quickly about what other people are like based on a single meeting, particularly if that single meeting or encounter is negative. Yes, I think there is actually one person who could be really negative today and could try to hold you back and come up with reasons why you shouldn't do what you're trying to do, and that could be a problem. But don't take it to heart. Because even if you come up with someone who is being a problem, you don't have to accept the situation, because right now your mind is on good form. Actually, I think your arguing skills are actually quite good, and so if you're told a reason why you can't or shouldn't, then you can talk your way around it. And I think you can, from a verbal perspective, I think today you can give a very good account of yourself. Libra, you are feeling that a real change has happened and that things are really getting better. And it's because Venus has moved out of Taurus. I think with Venus moving through Taurus, it was a bit difficult. Even though Venus rules Taurus, I think you were going through a period when you were perhaps more introspective than usual. You were having powerful thoughts, and you were really kind of going into yourself and asking difficult questions, but it didn't feel entirely comfortable. I mean, you're a Libran. You like things to be on the surface, and you like things to be straightforward, and you're looking for harmony, and having to deal with complicated matters isn't really what the typical Libran wants to be doing. And so yes, Venus is moving into Gemini, and on the face of it, that is certainly good news, because Libra is an air sign. Venus is now moving into Gemini, which is an air sign, so you now have more flexibility, or so it seems. And you are helped by the fact that Venus is in mutual reception to Mercury. Venus is in Gemini, which is a sign ruled by Mercury. Mercury is in Taurus, which is a sign ruled by Venus. And that gives you a lot of options. Though, I should point out that now Venus is moving towards a conjunction of the Sun. And I think that conjunction between the Sun may not be entirely helpful, and you may feel, as you try to be more sociable and try to interact with people more, that your freedom is in some way being encroached upon. While Venus was in Taurus, you were very focused on yourself, and it might have felt a bit grim, but in your own way you had quite a lot of freedom, because you were focused on your own self and on your own being and what was important to you. But now you're coming out of your shell a bit. You realize that what's going on out there may infringe on you, and I suppose that is the cost of having a high-profile social environment. As soon as you're out there in the world, you have to start fitting in, and that can be a problem. And I think that there are a couple of people who are maybe trying to get you to be someone that you're not, and it may become very clear. You may actually find yourself already starting to fit in order to make sure that you don't upset someone, or you might think you might upset someone. And this may also reflect how you're talking about your own opinions. You may suddenly find that you're being guarded. You have an opinion about the world, but you don't really want to express it because you're afraid that you might get a negative reaction. And so that is a bit of a problem, and I think that's something you need to be aware of. And you need to find a way of safeguarding your independence. And perhaps you need to make sure that you have properly learnt the lessons of the recent past. Recently you were in a strong position, and perhaps you're in a strong position because you were shutting out certain inputs from other people. You need to remember that. And so by all means, mix with other people, by all means have a higher profile social life, but at the same time you've got to try to be more self-sufficient, and every now and then you might want to sort of retreat into your own space and to reimagine your own independence, because your independence is important to you. And it's possible that there may be one or two people, might be friends, I don't think family, who are really trying to push you around. It could be a colleague, I suppose, but just one or two people are just trying to crowd you out and are trying to channel you in a particular direction. And you need to be aware of that. And as soon as you start to see it happening, I think that you need to take prompt action. And Libra, it's just really important that you're able to say what's on your mind. I think that there may be times when you become a little too self-conscious today. You're thinking, well, what if? What if I offended someone? Well, it doesn't matter. You've got things to say, and they need to be said. And in most cases, you shouldn't be self-conscious, and if that means that you have to be a bit brave, then so be it. Scorpio, you are in a state of mind which overall I think is fairly constructive, and I think that you're going to be helped by the fact that there is a trine between the moon and Mars. After all, Mars is your ruler, and Mars is in Aries, and Mars rules Scorpio, also rules Aries, and I pointed out that at the moment Mars is on the Chiron North Node midpoint, because there is this conjunction at the moment involving Chiron, Mars, and a North Node. And Mars is, it's a little bit past the Chiron North Node midpoint, but I still think that it's close enough. And I think that the positivity that I was talking about when I just now, you have to consider where can that positivity be channeled. And I think that you're acutely aware of other people's pain, if you think about it, or feel it. You can feel it, and you can see what's wrong with the world, and you have a certain sense of what is possible and what's not possible. That is really important, because sometimes you see you understand what's wrong with the world, but you really fundamentally you can do nothing about it. But you have an awareness of what you can put right and what you can't put right. And because of that awareness, I think that you can actually be very effective. And Scorpio is a passionate sign, and Scorpio does feel it all. And Scorpio doesn't usually like to make a big fuss about it. There isn't there that that biblical injunction that the left hand shouldn't see what the right hand is seeing. Or I don't know whether it's an injunction, but for example, if you're giving money to charity, no one should know about it. That's really important. I think a lot of people forget that, don't they? I know a lot of people, they like to make a big thing about giving money to charity, how generous they are. But of course, that's not the way it should be. And I think this is a time when Scorpios can give in a way that no one notices. And that's the way, that certainly is the way it should be. And by acting behind the scenes and not seeking any praise for what you're doing, you can be not just doing something useful and of benefit to society, but also that it's something that really is of benefit to yourself. You're going to just feel good about it, and you're going to feel centered about it. And so that is something that Scorpios should really try to work on, because I think that you can really help there. And the moon is making a trine to Mars, and okay, you could say, well, the moon trine Mars might be about you contributing small amounts of money to something. I'm not talking about large amounts of money. That's one way of looking at it. Moon trine Mars can also be about your money and you sorting out your money. I think that moon trine Mars it allows you to really understand your finances, and you may be aware of the beginnings of an opportunity to make money or to improve your financial situation. And it may require a little bit of vision and imagination, not risk. I'm not asking you to take risks. I'm asking you to just look at the situation as it stands, and you'll perhaps realize that there is a way to boost your finances in a way that is just really very simple, very straightforward. It just comes easily. There may be a little bit of hesitancy there, because you might be thinking, well, hold on, what are other people going to say? Maybe you might have a certain temptation to worry too much about what perhaps your family are thinking. Obviously, I must emphasize, I'm not telling you to take risks or anything here. I'm actually talking about taking action to make yourself more secure. But at the same time, you might have doubts, because you might wonder what other people are going to say, what other people are going to, how they're going to respond. But I think you have a clear idea about what actions need to be required, what actions need to be taken in order to shore up your finances. And I think you really will know what to do. Sagittarius. Moon continues moving through your sign, and I think that you're quite optimistic, at least to begin with. You feel that you can get things done, and that you do have a certain vision and a certain enthusiasm, but you do have to recognize what could hold you back. And if you focus too much on what you know and what you trust, then you might actually be held back. Because, when you're on familiar ground, the restrictions start to grow. It's almost like you stay in one place, you're feeling secure, but there are these plants, these creepers start emerging from the ground, and they start winding their way around your feet, and before you know it, you're stuck. And that does suggest that you do need to keep moving. If you stay in one place for too long today, you could get stuck. The undergrowth is moving faster than you realize. It's growing. and the growing undergrowth could drag you down. But yeah, if you keep moving, you will be fine. And you need to be moving towards things that are good for you, but work for you. You know what works. Absolutely, you know what works. And with the moon in Sagittarius, a fire sign, making a trine to Mars in Aries, a fire sign, Mars in Aries, a fire sign, that gives you an enormous amount of energy. And it's energy that, as I said, you need to keep moving. If you stop, then it all dissipates and things go wrong. And just move in a way that is that is active and creative, and your sense of humor is really going to matter today. Don't take things too seriously. People don't want things to be taken too seriously. Yeah, there are people who are very serious, no doubt about that. I mean, there is a square between the moon and Saturn, but it's moon in Sagittarius square Saturn. So that square between moon and Saturn does have a potential to really hold you back. But when I was talking about the overall planetary picture, I was kind of indicating that we really had a choice here. We can focus on moon square Saturn, or we can focus on moon trine Mars. And so moon square Saturn does need to be avoided, and that means you need to avoid serious people. People who are overly serious, too serious for their own good. And you need to instead focus on people who appreciate your sense of humor, who are fun-loving. And while this is happening, Venus is moving into Gemini. And, Gemini is your opposite sign. Venus in Gemini, represents someone, or perhaps more than one person, who are quite sort of versatile people who, like you, have a sense of fun and a sense of humor. And they are arriving on the scene, and they are perhaps there for you, and at the very least they can entertain you. And I think this is what we're picking up, that it should be a fun day. It should be light-hearted. It's not a day for taking things too seriously. Yeah, I know there was a full moon yesterday, but it's happened, and that full moon, it can be quite a fun full moon if it's possible to have such a thing as a fun full moon. And heliocentrically, we've got Venus moving towards a conjunction to Jupiter. I know we've had the geocentric Venus-Jupiter conjunction, but that's done. But the heliocentric Venus-Jupiter conjunction is still there. Remember, Jupiter rules Sagittarius. So keep it light and put the focus on yourself and what you enjoy and what amuses you. And you don't have to feel guilty about it. Capricorn, in many ways, you're not entirely in the mood for much. You have your own way of looking at things, and perhaps Capricorn, you just feel that, things are not right, and you'd prefer to wait for things to improve, and for the moment you just want to just be yourself. And I think that's fine. What you mustn't do, Capricorn, is inflict your view of the world onto other people. You could do. I mean, I think that is possible. After all, the moon is making a square to Saturn, and we could literally see that moon square Saturn in terms of the moon, someone else, Saturn, you. I mean, Moon rules Cancer. Cancer is your opposite sign, so we could see Moon is about someone close to you, or just the people you meet in general, the people around you in general, the Moon. And then Saturn is you, Saturn in Pisces. Perhaps taking things rather seriously. At the same time, having a somewhat grim view of the world. Not a grim view of yourself, but just a grim view of the world. I talked about this yesterday. I'm not going to go into details that are unnecessary, but just having a grim view of the world and just seeing that, the world is not as it should be. And there's a danger that you sort of inflict that onto others. Not necessarily in a deliberate way. It's just that if people spend too much time with you, it's quite possible you actually get them down. And so, Capricorn, I think it's just very important that you have an awareness of the impact you are having. And, I know we all think we're wonderful, but sometimes we're not the best thing available. And certain people don't need you right now. And so if people don't need you, then just accept it. It's not a situation that is going to last long. I mean, the Moon is in Sagittarius. From a Capricorn perspective, Moon in Sagittarius is somewhat low profile. It likes to have some distance, but the Moon is not going to be in Sagittarius forever. Tomorrow the Moon will move into Capricorn, and things are going to be very different when the Moon moves into Capricorn. But just right now, I think that you just need to just accept your limitations and just understand that you might not always be a positive influence. Now, that doesn't mean to say that it's going to be a bad day. Not at all. It's all about making the most of everything that is on offer. And left to your own devices, you can do a lot of really useful work. You can really accomplish a lot. People won't see what you're doing. They may not even understand what you're doing. But if you just keep going and you focus on, perhaps what you're going to be doing next week, and you just realize that everything has to be properly prepared, and you do that, then you can, as the week draws to a close, I think that you can actually put yourself in a very good position for future advances. And I'm sorry to be a little negative today, but you can't always be positive. But as I've said, it's all about how you use what's available to you. And just if you spend all day trying to mix with other people and get on with other people, then the day will be disappointing, I think. If you focus on yourself and what you can do in your own space, then I think that you'll be well pleased with the eventual results. Aquarius, you do have, I suppose, a certain negative streak today. I mean, Aquarius, like Capricorn, has Saturn as its ruler. I think that you have a vivid imagination, and I think that you can see what's wrong with the world. It's pretty clear to you what's wrong with the world. Things could be better, but you also perhaps feel that they won't be better. But that's just perhaps your quirk, the quirk of the quirk of negativity, and I don't think you mind actually. I think you perhaps quite enjoy it in a way, trying to portray the world in a negative light and looking at all the things that can go wrong. And you may even enjoy telling people about your particular perspective. But you mustn't take it too far. I mean, broadly speaking today, I think that socially, I think it looks good. I think that you'll be able to interact with people. I think you'll be able to share some of your positive visions with other people, and people I think will be interested. You could also share some of your negative visions. That is also possible. But you do have to bear in mind that the moon is sextile, the moon is square Saturn. So you could argue that the moon represents the people out there, the world out there, and the Saturn represents you. So you could be a bit of a downer on things if you're not careful. I don't think you have to be. I don't think it's necessary. The moon doesn't just square Saturn, it also makes a trine to Mars, and I think that moon trine Mars can make you really very dynamic, and I think that you can if you can just focus on the positives, and then I think you can be a really quite inspiring person. And I think also you may have the chance to be very constructive. You can look at what other people are trying to achieve and their plans, and you can look at these plans and ideas, and you can look at them constructively, and I think give constructive criticism. You just have to make sure that criticism doesn't go too far. It's all about being constructive. It's about considering how you can make things better, and I think that is probably the underlying principle. So in terms of whatever you say, whatever you communicate, whatever you write, at least today, ask yourself, what impact is it going to have? You write a text message, or a one-word text message or an email. Ask yourself, how is that going to help? Is it going to help? If it's not going to help, or you're just doing it because it sounds fun, then don't do it. Consider the impact. And that might mean that you communicate a bit less than you were planning on communicating, but it does mean that your communications will be entirely positive. And just, if it feels right to you, now that doesn't mean to say you can't criticize people. Yeah, sure, you can criticize people, but you have to ask what is the result of it, because it's very easy to just want to criticize people just to make people feel bad. I'm afraid it's human nature. We all do it. You just say something just to make people feel bad, and that's not what that's not what it's about. It's about, it's not about necessarily making people feel good, but it's about helping people. If they're doing something wrong, you tell them they're doing something wrong, and you tell them how, and you tell them how they should be doing it, and that's how you should go through today. Just be constructive, and just try to put some of your negativity or even misanthropy to one side, and just focus on what you can do in a constructive and, yes, humanitarian way. Pisces. I think Pisces, it's a day when you are in a pretty good position. I think that you have a certain authority about you. And I know that you've actually had an authority about you for some time. I mean, it was over a year ago that Saturn went into your sign, and ever since, you've had sort of a growing sense of, who you are, what you can achieve, and also a sense of, your own boundaries and discipline. It doesn't sound typically Piscean, but I think for the last year and more, you have been really able to assert yourself in a constructive way that has allowed you to gain respect. And I think it's more of the same today. And there is this square aspect between the moon and Saturn today. And I have been a bit negative about this moon square Saturn when I've been describing it to other signs. But for you, I'm not going to be negative about it at all. I think that it's actually very appropriate. I think that with the moon in Sagittarius, it's about your imagination, it's about your vision, about what you want to do, about where you want to go to. And with the square Saturn, remember that Saturn is in Pisces, it's your sign. It's that Saturn is trying to create structure. It's trying to put Sagittarius in a bottle. Sometimes Sagittarius does actually have to be put in a bottle. Sagittarius can go all over the place. I mean, Sagittarius can be, it can be like a dangerous radioactive substance, which can jump everywhere. It's like that stuff. What is it? There's that polonium-210. Apparently, if you're working with it in a laboratory or whatever, it just, as soon as it gets released, it just goes everywhere. Everything gets contaminated because it's so active. It just goes everywhere because the particles are jumping here, there, and everywhere. Sorry about that radioactive analogy. I'm just a bit obsessed about radiation in general, but it's what came to mind. I know that's a bit whimsical, but Sagittarius can go everywhere. And it can cause a lot of damage, like highly radioactive particles, and it sometimes needs to be constrained. And so that might be Saturn square Moon, or the chaos of Sagittarius needs to be focused. And I think that that's something you can do. You can put Sagittarius in a bottle or in a beam, in a tightly focused beam, and actually get things done with that Sagittarian energy, and really make the most of it. We've just had a Sagittarian full moon after all, and we only usually get one Sagittarian full moon in a year, and so it's important that you do make the most of it. And I think today, Pisces, I really do think that you are focused, and you are also quite authoritative in terms of how you relate to the world around you. You just give the impression of knowing what's right, knowing what's wrong, having your facts straight. And I think, Pisces, people really will listen to you, and I think that is something you need to accept. So don't feel negative, don't feel you can't, because today I really do think that you can, and I think that you need to trust your own ability, and also trust yourself to be authoritative. It might be a position that you're not entirely comfortable with, but I do think that you can pull it off, and I think that today you can gain a lot of respect. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and I'm now going to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So, as always, I threw the 3 coins 6 times, and I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video. And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 15, which is modesty. I mean, in a way, that speaks for itself. It is important not to have show, to claim to be someone who we're not. Just keep it simple. If something about us is too extreme, we need to bring it in. We need to rationalize it. If something about us is too showy, we need to make sure that we restrict it. We need to, we're not in the business today of desperately trying to get attention. We're just trying to fit in and do what we can and make the most of what we've got. And there are two moving lines here, and the second line moves and the fifth line moves. So with the second line moving, it's indicating that we're quite fortunate. We are getting results. We really do not have to be showy to be listened to, and we are actually having an influence. It might not feel like it, but we are. And so we can just move along in a very sort of quiet, unassuming way. Then the fifth line moves. And the fifth line is somewhat complicated. Because we think of modesty about not drawing attention to ourselves and not being obsessed with our own ego. But the fifth line is saying we can take things too far. We can be too modest, particularly if the situation demands that we do something else. And this sometimes we reach a point where we realize that something's wrong. It may be that someone is behaving badly, and it may be that people in authority are behaving badly, and in that situation it's not about our ego. It's like we're in a situation where we have to act, and it's about making sure that the situation is improved. And so we have to actually do something that on the surface might appear not modest at all, but it's assertiveness without ego. We have something to do, something is wrong, we have to sort it out. And maybe it actually links with Mars on the Chiron North Node midpoint, because I did think that Mars on the Chiron North Node midpoint was about having to take action to put something right that may be wrong. And maybe that's what we're going to realize today, that something is wrong, we need to put it right. Yes, we need to draw attention to ourselves, but it's not an issue about modesty or lack of modesty. It's about having to respond to a situation and having a responsibility to respond. And this hexagram, because we've got two moving lines, it does move, and it transitions to hexagram 48, which is the well. And this perhaps gives some context to why we might want to take action. The well is something we always need. The well doesn't change. The concept of a well is something we always understand. We need to have, it's a hole in the ground where we draw our water. A lot of places now, they still rely on aquifers, underground water. Underground water was important just as important. It's just important now as it was, I don't know, 5,000 years ago. The well always needs to be there. The well always needs to be in good condition. And so perhaps one reason we had to take dramatic initiative or we should have been taking a dramatic initiative, is because something was going on which was attacking the well. Remember, without water, we're done for. Society's done for. We need water, and that well must be in good condition. That well must not be neglected, and it must not be damaged through someone's stupidity. And so it's something that needs to be protected, that we all need. And so perhaps in light of the previous hexagram, we can see that someone's actions could potentially be damaging our long-term sustenance, not just our long-term sustenance, but the people around us, their long-term sustenance. And we might then need to take action. I mean, it could be something environmental in an extreme case. Maybe someone wants to do something stupid, like develop something and damage an aquifer or damage a wetland, or it could be something extreme if you're into environmentalism. But it just could be that action is required to make sure that something really important is kept in place. And it does seem, with that fifth line in the previous hexagram of modesty, that we can be too modest. If we sit around and do nothing, then we can just be watching something really important, which we all need, being destroyed. And I don't know at what unit, or what the unit of analysis is for this I Ching reading, whether the unit of analysis is society, or whether it's a family, or it's our city, or our neighbours. So perhaps you need to work out what the unit of analysis is in terms of this I Ching, and then that will give you an idea about where you need to be putting your energies. But if something is being attacked, something we all need for our sustenance, then you must be ready to defend it and to step in. But as always, with defence, I'm not asking you to risk your life and limb or anything like that, but just be aware of that. And that is the I Ching. And now I want to consider my homeland. I haven't been there since 2019, the UK. And yeah, there's going to be an election, and I need to consider what's happening. And top right, I've got Keir Starmer. He's the leader of the opposition, and we've got Rishi Sunak, and we've got Nigel Farage. So Nigel Farage, I put his picture up because when I was thinking about Nigel Farage last night, we weren't sure what he was going to do, because he was about to make an announcement, and now he's made his announcement. So Nigel Farage has now said he's not going to be part of this. I mean, he's not going to stand for Parliament because he wants to help Trump. And so I'm just going to quickly have a very quick look at Nigel Farage's chart. And, Nigel Farage, whatever you think about him, he is, one of the most gifted communicators in the country. He can make things happen. And this is his chart. And what you'll notice is that he's got Venus at 2931 Taurus. So if we compare Nigel Farage's chart, with what's going on today, you will see that that he's there was this Jupiter-Venus conjunction at 29 Taurus, right on Nigel's Venus. And I don't know exactly what happened, but his Venus I think perhaps we can see how this might be working. So let me just we'll put Nigel Farage in the middle, and then we will put in Rishi, the announcement that Rishi Sunak made that there's going to be an election, just to compare it with Nigel's chart. So Rishi Sunak made his announcement with a Venus. I mean, I'm going to go into this chart in detail. I just want to compare it to Nigel Farage's chart. Rishi Sunak made this conjunction at the time of a Jupiter-Venus conjunction, and it was hitting Farage's Venus. Now, Farage's Venus is in Taurus. It's, I suppose, well placed in Taurus, and it's in the 9th house. Now, whether you use the Placidus house system, by Placidus, it's okay, it's kind of close to the midheaven, but it's in a different But Nigel Farage's midheaven is at 5 Gemini, but Venus is not in Gemini. I would have said that Venus has a 9th house feel to it. And Nigel Farage might be very into Britain, but he spent a lot of his time out of Britain. And, for example, in Brussels or Strasbourg or the European Parliament. And so there's a 9th house foreign feel to that Venus. And so with Jupiter-Venus conjunction on his Venus, he decided that he wants to spend more time, focus on his time helping Donald Trump get elected. And I think that kind of makes sense with that Venus-Jupiter conjunction hitting his Venus. And so one wonders what impact Farage will have on Trump's election campaign. So I'm not going to talk about Nigel Farage anymore because he's not standing for Parliament. So, I mean, I think that there are perhaps other things to consider. Now let's actually go to the announcement. So this is when Rishi Sunak, British Prime Minister, announced that there was going to be an election. Now you could say, well, that's a good time. Venus is conjunct Jupiter. Okay, it's true. Venus is conjunct Jupiter when he made the announcement. It's right at the end of Taurus. It's in the 8th house. I'm not convinced that just because Venus is conjunct Jupiter, everything's going to be fine for the election. Of course, it's not. The chances of the Tories winning this election are, well, they're not 0, but the odds are 1 in 7 of the Labour, not just winning, but Labour getting an absolute majority. 1 in 7, not 7 to 1, but 1 in 7. So that would mean, I think, that I'm not very good at gambling odds. So if I bet $70 on, or £70 on Labour but getting an absolute majority, I'd get £80 back. That's right, I'd make £10. Is that right? So it's very, very likely that the Labour is not just going to win the election but get an absolute majority, and that's what the betting odds are about. And I'm not, so I didn't think there's much point in trying to forecast the result from an astrological perspective, because I think it's a bit of a no-win situation for me. And at the time of the announcement, the moon was, I made it 7, I went to the Guardian website. I think he started making his speech at 5:16. I think he made the announcement at 5:17, if I understood the Guardian right. And the moon was making an opposition to Uranus. It does make an opposition to the Venus and Jupiter, but you know that moon opposition Uranus indicates the sort of the whole drama around the event. And Pluto is on the IC, and again that's indicating that it is quite a sort of a dramatic announcement. An announcement he made too early, and in a way it was a bit unexpected. I think people knew it was going to happen on the day, but overall it doesn't seem to be a great time to be making such an announcement. and comparing it with Rishi Sunak's horoscope. So Rishi Sunak, so here's Rishi Sunak's chart in the middle. I don't know Rishi Sunak's time of birth, and all I can say is that Rishi Sunak has a Sun-Mercury conjunction. I mean, I know that he's a clever man. He's very young to be prime minister, and where did he go? I think he went to Winchester, didn't he? Winchester is a British public school, as in independent public school. Public school means something different in the UK than it means in the US. In other words, public school means a private school. But I think he went to Winchester, and he went to Oxbridge. You know, he's clever, and but he's still got Mercury conjunct Sun, and that Mercury conjunct Sun, it at times may just give him a critical inability to understand what's going on, regardless of his intelligence, and something is blinding him. I mean, I don't quite know what it is because I don't know his time of birth, and it's opposition Uranus. And so you can see how someone with opposition Mercury, Sun-Mercury conjunction, is inclined to do something dramatic, which might even be a little bit uncharacteristic. And that's certainly something going on in his chart. Now, at the time of the announcement, the moon was at 21 Scorpio. 21 Scorpio, was that really a good time to make that announcement? And it has been suggested to me that maybe I suppose people think, because he's of an Indian background, he must be consulting astrologers and all this kind of stuff. I think maybe there's a little bit of a stereotype there about, just because he's Indian doesn't mean to say he's into astrology. But my guess is no. I don't think Rishi Sunak consulted as an astrologer. Of course, that would have been a Vedic chart in terms of this announcement that he would have used. But I'm not going to go down that road. But the moon was opposition Uranus, and at the time of the announcement. Now look at Uranus. Uranus at the time of the announcement was at 23 degrees 39 Taurus. His natal Uranus is at 23:38 Taurus. So he had Uranus exactly opposition his Uranus. Now Uranus, you could say, well, Uranus is a sort of collective planet relating to some generations. It's not personal. But you see, he's prime minister. So if you're prime minister, you personalize the collective. And so that's who he is. That's why when you become a senior politician, you lose a lot of your individuality. You become a creature of the cosmos. And so hence Uranus opposition Uranus, it really did hit him, and the moon was a trigger. And so I think we can really see how that is working. It was a surprise thing, and it's his Uranus opposition his Sun Mercury, and that's really what I think it was all about. And I think we don't know where. You could say, well, Chiron's conjunct his moon, but we don't know where his moon is because I don't have his time of birth. And so it's all about Uranus, his announcement for him. Uranus opposition his Uranus. Uranus opposition Uranus is, I suppose it's one of those midlife things, isn't it? Because we all have Uranus opposition Uranus when we're in our early 40s. That's when it happens. I know that people live longer, so for most people it's going to be before the midpoint in their life, Uranus opposition Uranus, but it is that sort of, I don't know, it would be young middle age. I don't know, it depends how you see it. But that's how it how perhaps he expressed his midlife crisis by calling an election. There are, as I said, there are other ways of describing a midlife crisis astrologically, but Uranus opposition Uranus is certainly one of them. We also have to consider how this might have affected Keir Starmer. So Keir Starmer is the leader of the opposition, and I don't have a great feel for Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer, we don't know how. We don't have his time of birth. Maybe his time of birth will become available. I don't know. I think most people find Keir Starmer pretty uninspiring. But he has a Sun-Pluto conjunction. This makes him ambitious, I would have said. Sense of power, and its opposition Jupiter opposition Pluto. With Jupiter opposition Pluto, there's a great desire for self-improvement. It might not seem obvious, but you always want to do better. And I think that may be part of who he is. He's a good lawyer. That's what he was. But it's really just difficult with his chart because I don't have a time of birth, and he was born very close to Chris Christie, if you're interested. And he's got stuff in Virgo, but he's quite a Libran actually, and I think we can see his Libran thing. It's being head of the Labour Party is a balancing act, and he's getting himself into all sorts of knots about Gaza. He's trying to, the Labour Party has had this great anti-Semitism issue a few years ago, where there was real anti-Semitism within the Labour Party, and he is from someone who I think is on the right of the party, is trying to do something about it, but at the same time he understands that there's this constituency within the party that is fanatically supporting Gaza, and so he has to get the balance right with the Middle East. And of course there is George Galloway, who used to be a Labour MP, who's potentially could take votes away from Labour. So it is a balancing act. So this is perhaps a problem Starmer has, being a Libran, I know he's a Virgo, but having Mercury, Moon and Venus in Libra, getting the balance right and keeping all the factions in the Labour Party together could be hard work. Now, the announcement that was made was. So let's go back to the announcement and how that announcement impacted Keir Starmer. Again, I'm not saying that it does affect him, but so there's the announcement, and what is going on in Keir Starmer's chart. I don't think that necessarily a huge amount is happening for him. It doesn't strike me to be a particularly big deal, at least on a superficial level. He doesn't have anything in fixed signs, so I don't think. Okay, Mars is potentially opposition his moon. The Mars conjunct North Node is, if his moon is at 15 to Libra, but he would have had Mars opposition his moon sometime in the last few weeks or the next few weeks. But for Keir Starmer, I'm not convinced that this day is particularly special, which moves us on to the day of the election. So the day of the election is the election is on July the 4th, and the UK general election, July the 4th, 2024. I believe polling stations open at 7 a.m. And so here is the election day. The moon is at 21 Gemini, and the moon is just separating from a square of Saturn but it does make a square to Neptune. It's true, but from a traditional perspective, the moon is void of course. The moon is not going anywhere. It's made its last major aspect to a traditional planet before leaving the sign at the opening of poles. And that may be a hint that, we get excited about this election, but does it actually mean anything? So how important is it? It just may not be as important as perhaps some of us are thinking. Like in America, people talk about the uni party in the United States, but people talk about the uni party in the UK, the Labour and Conservative. It really doesn't make any difference. I know it often does make a difference, but I suspect it perhaps doesn't make a difference. And the moon is separating from a square to Saturn, and that's just a general picture about what is happening, and it just doesn't look especially exciting. So assuming that okay, I suppose consider what this election means for Rishi Sunak. I don't want to. Okay, general election. There's Rishi Sunak in the middle, and his chart in the middle. Again, we don't know his time of birth, so it's really pretty useless looking at Sunak's chart in great detail because we just don't have a time of birth. And so Uranus is at 25 Taurus. It's sort of it's still opposition his Uranus. Mars is moving to an opposition of his Mercury. So I suppose Mars opposition Mercury is, that I suppose is, the beginning of, he steps down. Then, the Taurus have to find another leader, and that's Mars conjunct Mercury, and that might be how it's working. But again, with Sunak, I don't really have a time of birth, so it is a bit difficult. So what I think is perhaps more important is to consider the fact that it's very likely that Keir Starmer is going to become the Prime Minister on the next day, which would be happens I think next morning. If he gets an absolute majority, which I think is likely, then we can think in terms of the beginning of Keir Starmer's premiership, which would be on July the 5th, 2024. I've gone for 11 a.m. I don't know. It's when he goes to the palace to be anointed Prime Minister. And this is roughly the time that Keir Starmer will become Prime Minister on July the 5th, if the bookies are correct. And there are a couple of points about this, is that it's just before a new moon. And I know it's a new moon in Cancer, but it's just before a new moon. The moon is at the absolute dead end of its cycle. Moon is applying to a conjunction of the sun. The moon is deeply waning. I mean, if he could just be made Prime Minister a couple of days later, it would be a lot better. But the fact that he's going to become Prime Minister, the start of a Labour government, as you've got an applying new moon, really does suggest it's just more of the same. It's end of cycle stuff, the Starmer regime. And it's not Starmer's fault, it's just the way it is. And this new moon, by the way, it's July the 5th. It's going to be at 14 Cancer. That new moon is going to have a big impact on the US because it's an Independence Day new moon. Or, okay, the new moon is just a day after the Independence Day, but it is perhaps about America, and maybe there's a hint there that the Starmer premiership will be very much about what is happening in the US because of that US influence with his regime. But I just think that applying new moon is just not very helpful. It is end of cycle stuff. Turning to how this affects Starmer. So I think I've got, yeah. So here we've got Starmer's chart in the middle, and here are the positions of the planets for July the 5th, where I think, okay, he might drop dead or be assassinated. I suppose that's always possible, but hopefully not. And so Starmer's chart in the middle, the positions of the planets on the outer ring is when he becomes prime minister. And what stands out is there's Jupiter. So Jupiter is at 9 Gemini. So 9-10 Gemini. So there's his Sun-Pluto conjunction. And it's actually opposition Chiron. And so Jupiter is hitting his Sun-Pluto conjunction opposition Chiron. So, and in fact, it's hitting his opposition. You know, he's got Jupiter-Chiron opposition Sun-Pluto, and that's him, I suppose, the desire for self-improvement, the desire for power, and Jupiter is hitting it. So it's kind of making a T-square. And so that is what is happening for him when he becomes prime minister. Plus, the moon at 7 Cancer will be pretty close to his Mars. So, yeah, it's him becoming prime minister, but he's got his work cut out. It's not going to be fun. I think it's pretty unlikely that his time as prime minister is going to be fun. It's going to be, I don't think his honeymoon period is going to last for very long. And there's Uranus. Quincunx his Venus. That's difficult. It's going to be difficult for him. And finally, I wanted to consider the UK and what's going on in the UK with all of this and how it affects. Okay, I'm going to use the chart of England, and so here's a chart of England. December the 31st. Okay, it's December the 25th, 1066, but this program has converted it to the Gregorian calendar. So don't worry, it is December the 25th, even though the chart shows December the 31st, because William I was crowned at noon on Christmas Day, 1066. I think it was a Monday, actually, Christmas Day, 1066. And so if we consider there's England's chart and we compare it with the Starmer regime, and the UK has its south node at 1925 Pisces in the 12th house. Saturn is exactly on Britain's south node. I would have said that the Labour government, I mean, I know the Tory government was pretty useless, but it's taking Britain back. It's not a forward-looking thing. Interestingly, when Cameron, when the Tories won the election in 2010, albeit in coalition with, I think, Liberal Democrats, the Saturn was on England's north node, close, not exactly, but now it's on England's south node. It's about England going in the wrong place. So England's north node is in Virgo. This is where it should be moving. You know, being sensible, structured, you know, all that Virgo stuff. Pisces perhaps represents the chaos and the division that is potentially there in Britain. You know, we had this in England. I know England is now the UK, but fundamentally England, you could argue, has colonised a great chunk of the British Isles over the centuries, and did indeed at one stage colonise all of them, but Republic of Ireland is now independent. And look at the linkage. That's Britain when William the Conqueror was crowned. Look at that North Node, South Node, 1925, Neptune 29.4. Now that's Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Okay, it's a very wide Saturn conjunction. So you had Saturn on England's South Node, and you had Neptune on England's moon. And so you've got this at the time of when Starmer become Prime Minister. And I think that suggests to me that it is not easy at all. I think that you're starting to move into this rather Piscean phase, this Piscean aspect of Britain, which perhaps we haven't seen for a long time. It's perhaps chaos and division, and maybe you can go back and think about the Wars of the Roses or the Civil War. That I think that is where England is going to be pulled, or England, the British Isles, where we're going to be pulled. So I don't think that this Labour government is going to help at all in terms, certainly by looking at that exact conjunction between Saturn in the South Node, Saturn conjunct the South Node. I think Britain is going to be moving backwards, and so the results are not, I don't think, are going to be useful. And maybe if we've got transiting Chiron on England's ascendant, well, was William the Conqueror really crowned at exactly noon? I don't know. Possibly not. But we just don't know. As far as maybe someone knows, but I don't know. The moon in Cancer is potentially on England's IC, but overall it just doesn't look particularly positive. And I just wanted to finally look at the impact of all of this on King Charles III's chart. So here's King Charles III's chart, because he is the head of state, he's the king, the land is a king, and the king is the land. And just a reminder that Charles has his moon at 0 degrees 28 Taurus, and Pluto is at 119 Aquarius, going backwards, squaring his Pluto. Does this say something about the country, or is this saying something about Charles? I think Charles is the land, and the land is the king, and Pluto is square the moon. And this is what the UK is going to be experiencing as Pluto goes retrograde. And one other thing which is interesting, which you might want to consider, Charles has his ascendant at 5 degrees 24 Leo, and his midheaven at 13-17 Aries. And have a look at the chart at the UK general election. UK general election. The ascendant is 5-39 Leo, and the midheaven is at 13-14, 41 Aries. So the angles, the ascendant and the midheaven, for when the polls open at 7 a.m. are the same angles that Charles III has. So they have the same. So Charles III is the country. The land is a king is the land. So I did say that the country, that maybe this election is unimportant, but the fact that the angles repeat could be really quite significant. Okay, one final chart, not specifically about the election, and that is the chart for the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in December 21st, 1920, set for Westminster. And I think that this is a big change when you have a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, and it sets up Britain for the next 20 years. And so at the time of this conjunction, set for London, we had 0 degrees 40 Leo rising. And that meant that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which was at 0-29 degrees Aquarius, was exactly on the descendant. And, of course, Pluto is going retrograde onto the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So the whole world is going to be feeling the power of that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2020. But it's also going to have a particular effect on England. And so, overall, I think things are looking difficult for England, and for UK. I mean, I'm sorry to alternate England, UK, whatever. I suppose I'm looking at the England chart, but I think that I understand it is the rest of the UK, but I think the England chart is the one we should look at to really understand what the UK is really like. But overall, I don't think things look too good, and this election is certainly not going to help. So that is all I'm going to say. Thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this video, I would be grateful if you were to like it. If you are not subscribed and you enjoyed the video, I would really appreciate it if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.